The USS William D. Porter is remembered as the unluckiest ship in the U.S. Navy. That reputation is deserved, but for the wrong reasons. The lesser-known fact is that the Porter nearly assassinated President Franklin D. Roosevelt, not once, but twice in the same week. The misconception is that the crew was incompetent. In truth, they were undertrained, overworked, and placed in situations no destroyer crew should have faced. The overlooked consequence is that the Porter's infamous torpedo incident led directly to changes in presidential security protocols that remain in effect today. A ship so embarrassing that the Navy's standard response to its name was a wry question. "Don't shoot, we're Republicans?" The phrase became a running joke, but the men who lived it were not laughing. The USS William D. Porter was commissioned on July 6, 1943 at the Orange, Texas shipyard. She was a Fletcher-class destroyer, 376 feet long, 2,050 tons, 5 5-inch guns, and 10 torpedo tubes. Standard Navy practice after commissioning is a shakedown cruise, weeks of drills, inspections, and gradual crew integration. The Porter got just 4 days. The urgency was real. The Navy needed every hull for the upcoming invasion of the Marshall Islands. But the crew was raw. Most had never been to sea before. The captain, Lieutenant Commander Wilfred Walter, was a competent officer who had been given an impossible timeline. He later wrote, "We were rushed through outfitting like a taxi through yellow lights." The Porter's first real mission was not combat. It was a secret voyage to North Africa, carrying classified cargo. But on November 12, 1943, the Porter received new orders. Join Task Force 61. Protect the USS Iowa. The Iowa was carrying President Roosevelt to the Tehran conference. No one told the Porter's crew that the president was aboard until they were already underway. The secrecy was standard protocol, but it meant the Porter's crew had no time to prepare for the most high-stakes escort mission of the war. Here's an overlooked human detail. The Porter's crew averaged just 21 years old. Their training had emphasized gunnery and torpedo drills against enemy ships. But honestly, nobody had trained them on what not to do when the president is on the battleship you are escorting. The first incident happened on November 12th during torpedo exercises. A depth charge rolled off the Porter's stern and hit the rough sea. It detonated close enough to the Iowa that the battleship's crew actually felt the shockwave. The Iowa thought it was under attack. The Porter signaled, "Sorry. Deep 6. Our fault." That was not a formal naval signal. It was just a 19-year-old signalman making up words because, well, he was embarrassed. The second incident happened the next day. A large wave swept over the Porter's deck, tearing away a life raft and one of the depth charge racks. The rack smashed against the Iowa's bow before sinking. Again, the Iowa signaled, "What is your problem?" The Porter signaled back, "Rough seas." That was true. But honestly, the Iowa's captain suspected the Porter was simply being mishandled. So the third incident, the one that really made history, happened on November 14th. The task force was in the middle of some anti-submarine drills. The Porter got the order to simulate a torpedo attack on the Iowa. Now, the standard drill is pretty straightforward. You aim your torpedo tubes at the target. You go through the firing sequence, but you do not actually fire. Torpedo Man, 3rd class. Lawrence Davenport was sitting at the controls. His job was, basically, to complete the firing sequence without actually pulling the trigger. But here's the thing. Each torpedo tube had a primer, which is a small explosive charge that would push the torpedo out of the tube. Those primers were supposed to be removed before any drill. This time, they hadn't been. Davenport went ahead and completed the sequence. The primer fired. And just like that, the torpedo launched. A live war-shot torpedo, loaded with 500 pounds of Torpex explosive, was now racing toward the USS Iowa at 46 knots. President Roosevelt was on the Iowa's deck, watching the drill from his wheelchair. The Porter's signalman did not have a prearranged code for, well, we accidentally fired a live torpedo at the president, so he sent "Lion, Lion, Lion," which was the code for a torpedo in the water. The Iowa's radio operator replied, "Please repeat." The Porter sent back, "Torpedo in the water, not a drill. Repeat, torpedo in the water." The Iowa turned hard to port. The torpedo passed roughly 300 meters astern of the battleship and detonated against the Iowa's wake. No one was hurt, but honestly, the damage was done. The Iowa trained every gun on the Porter. For 10 minutes, the Porter's crew believed they were about to be sunk by their own side. The commanding officer of the Iowa, Captain John McCrea, was ready to give the order. Only the fact that the Porter had immediately confessed prevented the attack. The Porter was ordered to detach from the task force and proceed to Bermuda for a full investigation. When the ship arrived, the entire crew was arrested, all 250 men. They were confined to the ship for 6 days, while Navy investigators determined what had happened. The investigation concluded that Davenport had forgotten to remove the primer. Davenport was sentenced to 14 years hard labor. President Roosevelt personally commuted the sentence. Roosevelt reportedly told the Secretary of the Navy, "Accidents happen in wartime. A young man's mistake should not ruin his life." Davenport served less than a year and was reassigned to a supply ship. The Porter's crew, still intact, still embarrassed, was sent to the Aleutian Islands. The Navy's thinking was, if the Porter screws up again, at least it will only annoy the Japanese. In the Aleutians, the Porter accidentally shelled the commanding officer's house on shore. Live rounds, no one injured. Then a sailor fell overboard during a storm and was never found. Then another depth charge rolled off the stern and nearly hit a sister ship. The Porter became known as the Jinx ship. Sailors actually requested transfers in writing, hoping to get off the vessel. But, the Navy denied those requests. In June of 1945, the Porter was assigned to the Okinawa Campaign, which, honestly, turned out to be the bloodiest battle of the Pacific. For about 3 weeks, the ship performed admirably. It shot down multiple kamikaze aircraft, provided naval gunfire support to Marines ashore, and, remarkably, received no damage. The crew, well, they began to believe they had finally turned a corner. On June 10, 1945, a Japanese Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber appeared out of low clouds. The Porter's gunners opened fire and splashed the aircraft, but you see, the plane was already mortally wounded. It had actually been aiming for the nearby USS New Jersey. Instead, it crashed into the sea exactly next to the Porter. The explosion lifted the destroyer right out of the water. The Val had been carrying a 250-kilogram bomb. The bomb detonated alongside the Porter's hull, directly beneath the engine room. The ship lost power instantly. The crew abandoned ship over the next 3 hours. The Porter rolled over and sank stern first at 12:15 p.m. No crew members died in the sinking. Every man was rescued by nearby vessels. That is an astonishing fact. A ship so cursed that it almost killed the President of the United States, then sank under a plane it had already shot down, but lost not a single sailor. The story of the USS William D. Porter is usually told as a comedy of errors. But you know, the real lesson is about the gap between training and reality. The Navy rushed an untrained crew into service, gave them a complex weapons system, and put them next to the most valuable asset afloat. The torpedo incident was not the result of one sailor's incompetence. It was the result of a system that prioritized speed over readiness. And honestly, the broader lesson applies beyond the military. Every organization faces the pressure to deploy imperfect people into high-stakes situations. The question is not whether mistakes will happen. The question is whether the system survives the mistakes. The Porter survived because the Iowa had a skilled captain who turned hard to port instead of freezing. The crew survived because they learned from their failures, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. By Okinawa, the Porter was a solid combat ship. It just took a year of humiliation to get there. So, if you value history that goes deeper, subscribe to War Machiner and share this.